Everyone loves debating Google Maps versus Apple Maps, but most people don't realize just how important the differences really are. For example, you might not know that Google Maps doesn't always guide you along the fastest route. Seriously, I'm going to prove it to you in just a moment. Obviously, this video is not sponsored. I have no affiliation with Apple Maps or Google Maps. That being said, let's get into it. When you open both apps, they look fairly similar at first. Google is a bit more cluttered, with suggestions at the top like go home, restaurants, coffee, groceries, and so on. Apple, on the other hand, mostly just shows you the map, the weather in the top corner, and a small search bar at the bottom. If you tap on it, though, you'll see some suggestions. There are places you've recently been, guides that Apple recommends, as well as locations you may have saved in the past. Of course, you also have home and work for easier navigation. On Google's side, at the bottom, you have 3 tabs: Explore, You, and Contribute. I'll talk about those later. They're not super relevant for finding new places. But if you swipe up to What's New in Your Area, they show nearby hotels, restaurants, and different things people have posted. And this is where we find the first big difference between the two. Google Maps is really a reviews plus maps platform, whereas Apple Maps is really just maps. Both have Street View, and when you're navigating, you can avoid tolls and highways, but Google takes the lead here with a few major advantages. Built-in reviews. Not only can you see a ton of reviews, in my opinion even more reviews, but they're really easy to browse. You see the star ratings, photos, videos, and menus. It's very well integrated and fits perfectly into the app. Apple Maps does have reviews, but they aren't native to Apple Maps. They mostly pull from Yelp. And sometimes they use their own system with thumbs up or thumbs down percentages, so it's not very consistent depending on what you're looking at. Sometimes it's Yelp star ratings, sometimes it's a thumbs up percentage, and so on. Google also has a big advantage. It shows gas prices. Sure, it's only for regular gas. If you use premium or diesel, it still gives you a reference for which stations might be cheaper. And since most people use regular gas, that's a pretty big advantage. Google is also better, especially on desktop, for booking hotels or planning trips, because not only do both platforms show hotels, ratings, and all that, but Google shows you the price. You can plan for how many people and how many nights you're staying, including exactly which nights. Google also sometimes shows estimated toll prices when you choose a certain route. Both Apple Maps and Google Maps can distinguish between toll roads and non-toll roads, but Google has recently added, especially on Android, that's really where you see it the most right now, probably rolling out to most iPhones soon, the ability to show toll prices for the different routes you could take. So you can say, okay, it's 5 minutes longer, but it'll save me €1.37 or whatever. Now, we'll break down the maps themselves in a minute, but I have to say that when it comes to the map view, Apple actually does a really good job of showing lots of restaurants and places in a slightly better way, in my opinion. On Google Maps, it feels like street names are much bigger, and you can see a lot of things that are kind of grayed out, like funeral homes and random stuff. Apple seems to do a better job for me. If you're in an area and you're thinking, all right, let's find something to eat quickly, you're more likely to spot a McDonald's or something similar more easily on Apple Maps, in my opinion. Apple also has, as I mentioned, those third-party guides from magazines and blogs. That's pretty useful if you're traveling somewhere. I don't personally use them much, but it's a small point for Apple here. But overall, to wrap up category number 1, Google clearly has the advantage when it comes to finding places you want to go. And honestly, I've seen quite a few people who use Google Maps just to find places and then switch to Apple Maps for navigation, which made me wonder, why? Why wouldn't you just use Google Maps for navigation too? Well, that brings us to category number 2. To start with, how many taps does it actually take to begin driving somewhere? Honestly, it's pretty similar on both. Apple Maps, you tap on any destination, you tap the little car icon to drive, it shows you the route, and on the third tap, you hit go and you're off. Google Maps, there's one less tap. If you tap on the place you want to go, you can either tap Directions to see route options, or just tap Start and it'll begin guiding you immediately. But here's something really important. Remember earlier when I said that Google Maps doesn't always take you on the fastest route? A lot of people don't realize this, but there's a default setting in Google Maps that makes it choose the most fuel-efficient route. So sometimes it avoids tolls. Sometimes it saves gas, and that can be great if that's what you want. You should definitely leave it on if that's your priority. But most people want to take the fastest route. Seriously, look at how many people drive over the speed limit on the highway. They do it because they want to get there faster. So this is an important setting. Even if you use Google Maps, it's worth knowing that this setting exists. In Google Maps, just tap anywhere you want to go. Tap Directions, then swipe up on the dashboard, tap Settings, and you'll see Prefer Fuel-Efficient Routes. It's turned on by default, and I've seen it cost up to 5 or 6 minutes even on a short city drive. For some people, that can be really annoying, and it adds up over time. This is pretty controversial. Some people really want this, others don't. But I think it's a little sneaky on Google's part to add this without making it really obvious, without clearly telling people that this is what's happening. Most people assume Google Maps is taking them on the fastest route. Once you turn that off, the two seem to guide you using a very similar navigation algorithm. Both are fast. I find they take pretty much the same routes, show similar alternative options, and honestly, when it comes to navigating to places, both do a great job getting you where you need to go. But while you're driving, they do a very different job of presenting information. How much information is shown? Is it too much? Not enough? That's up to you. But recently, I have to say Apple Maps has been doing a really good job. Apple's strong point, exit visualization. Not only does Google Maps show you the exit and which lane you should be in, but Apple Maps shows you what the exit will actually look like and what your lane will look like as you exit. I find this especially useful, particularly if you're driving near big cities where there are multiple highway lanes and very complex exits. Apple Maps does an excellent job here. I think for navigation, Apple Maps might be slightly better overall, but I want to show you a few things I prefer about Google Maps while you're driving. At the top, both show your next turn, but on Google Maps, underneath that, it tells you what you'll do after. So if you're about to turn left, you might be wondering, okay, both lanes turn left. Am I turning right immediately after and should be in the middle lane? Or should I be in the left lane because I'm turning left again right away? And Google shows you, then turn right, or then turn left. On top of that, you can also swipe left and right at the top to scroll through upcoming directions, and it will zoom along your route and show you what that next turn will look like. This is something I do very often while driving. On Apple Maps, you can't do that, but you can swipe down and it shows your upcoming turns. However, it also covers the whole map when it does that. To me, Google Maps looks a bit more cluttered in the sense that it shows a lot of very opaque blocks, whereas Apple Maps has much more of a glass-like look. At the bottom, the arrival time and duration blend into the map, so it feels like you can still see where the road goes behind it. Plus, in the top right, you have the option to zoom out and see your full route if you want, or you can just focus on the next turn you're actually making. Again, these elements are fairly translucent too. You've got volume controls, which is a whole different category, and of course you have the option to report an incident. Both support incidents, so you can report police, accidents, traffic, construction, lots of things that can honestly be huge lifesavers while driving. If there's an obstacle on the road and you know about it ahead of time because Google or Apple Maps tells you, that's a big plus. Now, since more people use Google Maps than Apple Maps, I find it can be a slightly better resource. More things tend to get reported on Google Maps than Apple Maps, at least in my experience. Google Maps also has this really interesting feature that I've never personally used, but some people like it. Instead of always orienting the map in the direction you're driving, some people prefer north-up orientation, so it shows you driving kind of sideways. My brain doesn't work that way, but if yours does, that's something Google Maps offers and Apple Maps, at least as far as I can tell, does not. Google Maps also has the little fork button at the bottom for alternate routes. If you tap it, it's similar to Apple Maps showing the full route, and you can see the other route options there. So if you want to avoid a certain highway, you can do that. Both apps do a good job of detecting traffic jams ahead of time and offering alternate routes when needed. And you can choose different views on both, satellite view and several ways to view your map. But Google Maps offers a bit more. For example, it has a terrain view. Both can show public transportation when you're planning a trip, traffic maps, that kind of stuff. But clearly, Google has a few more visualization options. If you swipe up, you'll see that both have the option to add a stop. You can share your trip progress too, even though it's done differently. I'll talk about that later. Google Maps has a huge advantage in my opinion. It shows your speed right next to the speed limit sign. Apple Maps does show the speed limit on the road, but personally, seeing my speed and the limit side by side is extremely useful. You instantly think, oh, I'm driving too slow, or I'm driving too fast. I know your car has a speedometer, but I find myself using this feature all the time. Now, I've said a lot of positive things about Google Maps when it comes to navigation, but in the end, I still prefer Apple Maps. Why? Because it displays more information on the screen while feeling less cluttered, less busy. And most importantly, when you reach exits, it shows much more detail about what the ramp is actually going to look like. For me, that's a big advantage. And that's really something I wish Google would start copying. Let's move on to Category 3, Audio Navigation. When you're driving and want to hear voice directions for when to turn, Apple makes volume control incredibly easy. You can set different volume levels for your music and for navigation just by tapping the little speaker icon on the right. Of course, both Google and Apple let you mute directions or keep alerts only, but on Apple Maps you clearly see normal volume, louder, or softer. If you're listening to music and you think, damn, I wish this were quieter so I can hear my music better with navigation in the background, or if you want it louder, you can change it instantly. Google Maps lets you do the same thing, but you have to dig deeper into the settings. You tap Settings, then Navigation, then Volume and choose Softer, Normal, or Louder. As for the rest, there are a few voice options. There isn't much to change there. I think both do a solid job telling you what you need to hear. Google has a setting for more detailed voice guidance if you want, but I have to say that in this category, it's pretty much a tie. Both have natural-sounding voices, and both do a good job while driving of telling me where to go and what to do. Category 4. I call this Collaboration or Friends. There are a lot of features in mapping apps that I think most people don't even realize exist. For example, on Apple Maps, you can share your estimated arrival time with a single tap. It sends it to your friend or whoever you want and says something like, "Hey, I'm driving. My ETA is 3:15 p.m. I'll let you know if anything changes." There's a pre-written text message with the time, which is safer than typing it yourself. Google Maps has a really interesting feature that works a bit differently. It shares your real-time location until you arrive. So it sends it to your friend and they can see you on Google Maps as long as they also have Google Maps installed. They'll see where you are, what your ETA is, and they can follow you throughout the entire trip, and I find that safer. They can see if there's a problem. Of course, you could also just share your location using Find My, but with Google Maps, the ability to do this cross-platform, Android or iOS, and only for a limited time is really convenient. Google Maps also works like Find My, so if you want all your friends on one map or if you want your parents to know where you are and they don't have an iPhone, you can't use Find My, but you can use Google Maps. You can share your location for a set amount of time or indefinitely across multiple devices. They can see you on their computer, on their phone, whatever. As long as they're using Google Maps, they can see where you are for as long as you shared it. It's also really easy to save places on Google Maps. I mean, you can do that on Apple Maps too, but I like that it follows you across all platforms and devices. So if you have an HP PC and an iPhone, you can now use the same map planning on both devices. You can create an entire map, save the whole route, and then just start navigating on your phone. I use this to make restaurant lists that you can easily share with friends, and you can actually make them collaborative too. I was planning a trip with my family and we had an itinerary we were working on. We had lists of all the restaurants and things we wanted to see, and everyone could add to the list, and it worked really well. So when we arrived, whoever was driving or navigating could just pull out their phone, select the day's route, and all the stops were preloaded, making navigation really easy. So for collaboration, this one definitely leans toward Google Maps. Category 5. Walking Navigation. I love that Apple gives you really simple options right from the start. Do you want to avoid hills? Do you want to avoid busy roads? Do you want to avoid stairs? Maybe you're in a wheelchair and you don't want to be guided towards stairs. This is something Apple Maps has integrated really well directly into the navigation options. And it's the same for biking. You can choose to avoid hills or busy roads. I hope it already avoids stairs for biking anyway, but it's cool that this functionality is built in here. On Google Maps, you can choose to avoid ferries when walking, and you can make it wheelchair accessible, which will prioritize elevators and avoid stairs. But it won't let you avoid busy roads. I mean, it kind of does that automatically, but it won't let you explicitly avoid hills. That's something only Apple Maps lets you do. But Google Maps has this awesome 360-degree AR view. You know when you're in a city and you come out of the subway and you're completely disoriented? Well, on Google Maps, if you're navigating, you can just lift your phone and point it around and it'll show an augmented reality view through your camera with an arrow showing you which direction you should actually walk. It's a cool feature that helps you get oriented. I don't use it that much. I usually just prefer looking at the map and seeing the streets and which direction they go. But again, it's a feature that exists on Google Maps. Also, on Google Maps, when you plan a walk, and actually you can do this when planning almost anything, but when you plan a walk, if you swipe up and look at all the turns you'll need to make, it shows you the elevation throughout your entire route, which is useful. You can tell like, hey, this is actually pretty steep. Even though you can't go into Apple Maps and avoid steep hills, you can swipe down and see what each turn is going to look like, so you can kind of plan your route ahead of time. If you're going to a new city and you want to know whether it's a good place to walk, you can look at your route, check the street view at each turn, and say, okay, this looks good. I'll recognize that building, I'll turn right. I won't miss my turn. It's useful that they show all of that right there. Again, Apple Maps shows you all the turns, but they don't have that integrated street view. Both have a 360-degree view, like I mentioned earlier, but again, it's just a subtle difference in how it's presented. So, walking directions. I mean, it's subtle. Personally, I give the win to Apple Maps just because I like the way they've set it up. I like that it gives you more options if you want to avoid hills and stairs and that kind of thing. Just a bit more flexibility in how you walk, and the same goes for biking. Apple just gives you a bit more flexibility in how you can plan your route, whereas Google Maps feels like it's primarily built for driving, with walking and biking added on, but without as many settings to really customize it for how you want to walk or ride. Category 6. Device-specific features. The first one I want to talk about is offline maps. Both have offline maps, but there's a really subtle difference. Apple lets you reshape what that offline map looks like, basically which region you save. Google Maps does it in a 9:16 format like your phone screen, so if you want to save the entire state of Florida, which is very long and fairly narrow, you also have to include the states above and below it on Google Maps. On Apple Maps, you can save storage by downloading just Florida. Maybe you're staying within the boundaries of a national park or somewhere you want downloaded in case you lose service, but you don't want to eat up all your storage by downloading an entire state above and below you. Other device-specific or relevant features. Google works extremely well on basically any platform. If you have an iPad or a Windows PC, no matter what you're using, it's truly cross-platform. And it's very accessible from a browser, with all your saved places following you everywhere across all your devices. That said, Apple Maps is also available on desktop. If you have a Windows PC, you can just go to your browser and visit maps.apple.com, and you get the full experience there. It's really convenient that you can do that regardless of what device you're using. On top of that, if you're using a MacBook, an iMac, or any Mac device, there's a native Apple Maps app, which just feels cleaner since you can use it natively on your computer. Now, to be fair to Google, they have Google Earth, which is a pretty cool platform, but I find it very different from Google Maps. Very few people use Google Earth software to manage their maps. Most people just go to the browser version anyway, and you basically get the same experience. That said, Google Maps has a cool feature where you can measure distances. You can do this on your phone, on a computer, or pretty much any device. You can draw straight lines between 2 points and find out what that distance is. It's useful if you're trying to estimate the size of a space, or honestly, I use it all the time just for random things to measure distances in different places. When it comes to public transportation, both do a really good job of understanding your local train systems. Obviously, this depends on your city and where you are in the world, but at least where I am, Apple Maps and Google Maps know the schedules, stay up to date, and both seem to do a really good job. So up to this point, it's been pretty close between the two. Some things are better on Google Maps, others are better on Apple Maps. Now for Category 7, I'm hoping to finally separate these two apps. We're going to see which one is truly better based on features that are really interesting, original, or even downright weird that one or the other has. And honestly, depending on what you need, these things can be real deciding factors for you, or maybe they'll just convince you to switch to the other app. So let's start with something fun. Google Maps lets you change your driving avatar. That's pretty cool. You can replace it with a different colored car, a little triangle, or whatever color you want. There are different options to make the experience feel more personal. Apple Maps integrates really well with the rest of the Apple ecosystem, so anything you talk about in iMessage or browse in Safari links seamlessly with Apple Maps, and you really get that ecosystem feeling where everything is just a bit more convenient to use on your phone. Apple Maps also lets you create a custom route. If you long press on a pin, you get a few options, and one of them is Create a Custom Route. You can keep adding more pins and build a route. You could do this if you're planning a run, for example. You can do an out and back, you can make a loop. The app gives you information about it. It's pretty similar to what I mentioned with Google's Measure Distance feature, but instead of straight lines, it uses roads and creates real navigation between points, and that's pretty cool to be able to do. However, Google Maps, and this is a big point I haven't mentioned yet, Google Maps seems to have a lead over Apple Maps. It's true that in Paris, Apple Maps has become extremely beautiful and accurate, almost on par with Google Maps, but for the rest of the country, Google remains the undisputed reference, especially for public transport and small businesses. Interestingly, both apps show you the weather for different locations, but they do it differently. Apple shows it much more often. It's clearly visible in the top left, whereas Google usually doesn't. Sometimes it does when you zoom into a new city, and you can tap on it in Google. And one big point, and this is a really big positive for Google, unless you don't like it, Apple Maps has something somewhat similar where it remembers certain places, but Google Maps has Google Timeline. So if you ever wonder, okay, where is my friend's house? You forgot their address and you're embarrassed to ask again, you can go into Google Timeline, go back to the previous day, and it'll show you everywhere you went that day, including the address you visited. And honestly, I've done this many times to find friends' houses I've been to in the past. In the same way, if you ever get, I don't know, summoned to court or questioned, and someone suddenly puts you on the spot and asks, where were you on the night of June 7th? And you're like, I'm not really sure. Well, if you have Google Maps, you can go into Google Timeline and find out exactly what you did that day. I went for a walk, I drove to my parents' house, we went out to dinner. You can see all of that, and it's enabled by default. So some people might find that creepy. You can go in and delete everything if you don't want it there. Others find it incredibly useful and may not even realize it exists. So those are some interesting differences. There are so many more differences between these platforms, but which one is actually the best? Well, I'm glad you asked. In my opinion, it's really a cat and mouse game. Both are evolving to match and outperform each other in different areas and different regions. I've been a hardcore Google Maps user for a long time, but it really depends on what you need. Google Maps may have better detection of police speed traps or road obstacles. Apple Maps has a cleaner navigation interface with, in my opinion, clearly superior graphics. Google has a powerful software ecosystem with a smarter voice assistant, a massive review database, and tons of integrated features. So for me, when I'm planning a trip or if I'm in another country, I'm definitely going to use Google Maps. But if I'm navigating to a nearby place and I just want to get there quickly with a clean interface, Apple Maps does a really great job. Leave a comment and tell me which one you prefer. Now go check out my video on the 20 hidden Google Maps features nobody uses, or the one on Apple Maps if you prefer that app. I'll see you right there. Bye.